You're already live. Okay. Good morning. For another live this morning, we're at Holden Farm Dairy speaking to Patrick, and we are actually going to try something slightly challenging because this morning we are up on a farm on a hill. It has been incredibly windy through the night. We're going to try and take you from out in the field back towards the farm on a bit of a walk, so excuse us for any audio issues there might be on the way. Thank you very much, Patrick, for finding some time. I know you're incredibly busy and with an active farm, but also looking at lots of big picture issues about farming in this country. Can you give me very briefly, first of all, the actual Welsh name of this farm, and then what the farm's about?
The Welsh name is Bwlch yn Fawr, which is literal, translated into the larger pass of the alders. Wernan is alders, Fawr is greater or larger, and what's the other bit? Bwlch yn pass, yeah, larger pass of the alders. And we've been here since 1973.
You've been farming here?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're now the longest established organic dairy farm in Wales. But although I'm very proud to be organic, I think the challenges we've got now are much bigger than just whether you're organic or not. I think we need to think about all farmers going on a journey or addressing the changes of climate change, potentially irreversible climate change, biodiversity loss, and restoring our farming systems to within planetary boundaries, producing as much food as possible within those constraints, and that's what we're trying to do here. We've got a herd of Ayrshire cows, you can see in the distance.
Yes.
And
can you see all those cows in the distance?
There's about 75 of them. You saw us milking them this morning.
Indeed.
And we're turning all their milk into a cheddar-style raw milk cheese. That means unpasteurised milk.
Yep.
And that's our story. And also, of course, we have male animals which we rear for veal. And as part of our long history of this farm, we've also grown carrots here. In fact, this farm grew the first organic vegetables that Sainsbury's ever sold. They were carrots grown in this field, actually, and they were packed in our cowshed and sold to Sainsbury's. That was in 1985. So we've done lots of interesting things along the road.
And you were influential early on in speaking to Prince Charles about organic farming, is that right?
Well, when he first got interested in trying to farm in a sustainable way, which was in the early 80s, I was running the Soil Association, so he came and asked for stuff, and I've got to know him ever since.
Okay, and so you founded the Soil Association. I mean, apart from the farm and everything else, you founded the Soil Association?
No. The Soil Association was founded in 1946 by a woman called Lady Eve Balfour, and she was the niece of Prime Minister Balfour, so it's quite a posh organisation in its early days. And she was a radical and an orthodoxy challenger, and I joined much later in the 70s, so it was already 30 years old really before I became involved.
Okay, and so what was your journey from or into organic farming?
I'm a Londoner. My dad was a child psychiatrist.
Okay.
I've developed a love of nature from an early age, and I think that might actually go back to my Australian roots. That's another long story. Tasmania. My grandparents came from Tasmania. And I kept lots of animals. And when I was 20, my dad was posted out to San Francisco to Stanford University, and I went too, as you do. And I came under the influences of the Bay Area at that time. Very radical change was going on, and I sort of had this revelation that I wanted to get back to the land and farm in harmony with nature. So 6 of us came here in 1973 as a sort of community farm, and that was the beginning, and we've been here ever since.
Got you. Okay. So, and again, the wind has now picked up again. I hope the audio is still good enough. One of the things that we've been hearing from some farmers, there's been a bit of a variety of voices from farmers. Obviously, I'm landing randomly where I need to with the selected parameter and getting a chance to speak to people that are in front of me. There have been some farmers who really want to talk about climate change. They notice it all the time. Others who use the word climate cynic to me. When I speak to them a bit further, it seems to be not that they're cynical about whether the climate is changing, but there is some cynicism that seems to be more about rejecting the idea that farmers have done bad things over time, particularly people who've been running family farms. They feel a pride in having produced food for people. What would you say about that?
I think there's a lot of confusion and anxiety in the farming community at the moment, understandably so, because we're not getting clear signals from government about how we should respond to climate change and farm in a different way. year we arrived, he just died recently actually, I met him and he said, he leant over the gate, very proper Welsh, and he said, you know, we're all brothers and sisters on the land. And I think that's the truth about the farming community. We're united by our need to produce food, ideally working in harmony with nature. The policy signals and the market signals have forced a lot of farmers to farm in a way which hasn't been best for the planet or for the quality of food that we eat.
Yeah.
But now we need to change it so that it pays well to build soil carbon, to increase biodiversity in nature, to farm in harmony with nature. And that's part of my day job now, to try to create the conditions where all farmers can respond to this major challenge of climate change.
Shall we walk? Can we
Let's walk.
Okay, so just for anyone who has tuned in recently, we are with Patrick at the moment at Holden Farm, talking about the range of different types of farming, all the way from extreme permaculture to intense farming, and what the future for food might be. So Patrick, you mentioned briefly beforehand the big picture changes that need to be made, in particular what you think COP26, the climate change conference, what the main story for that should be in your view, and it's around farming.
Well, the COP21 in Paris became known for the Paris Agreement, where for the first time all the nations of the world decided that they needed to act together to address climate change and set targets which some countries have become legally binding.
Yep.
I think the COP26 needs to be seen, or hopefully will be seen, as the COP for food and farming. And I'm saying that, I can't walk at all. Let's walk for a second.
Okay, yeah.
I'm saying that because if you think about it, the planet used to be covered with rainforest and pristine wilderness. What's it covered with now? Farms. So the farms are the lungs of the planet, the digestive system of the planet. So what happens on farms will be the biggest single influence as to whether we can avoid irreversible climate change. And what's interesting about farming is that we are looking after a carbon bank, which is the soil.
Yep.
And if our farming practices can draw down CO2 from the atmosphere and put it back in the soil at scale across the world, then we can probably sequester as much CO2 as we need to keep things stable in the next 10 or 20 years. So the question is, can we farm in a way which is productive enough, but at the same time drawing down this carbon in the atmosphere back into the soil? And I think the answer is yes, we can. But the question is, what incentive farmers need to do that? And I think the key to it is that we need farming rotations which grow crops like this, oats and peas.
This is very, very mixed, isn't it?
It's a beautiful mixed crop. This is going to be combined in probably late August.
Oh, and there are actually pea pods.
Actually peas in the pod, and they'll go, they'll go hard.
Right.
That's just an early one.
Yeah.
And the cows will eat this as a kind of cow muesli in the winter, because one of the things we're doing here is we're trying to be completely self-sufficient. So we don't want this one to be a platform for imported animal feed or chemical fertilizers. We're just farming with the resources of this hill. So the question we're addressing on a daily basis is, how much food can we produce from this land without buying in non-renewable inputs? And so that means we have to grow our own cow food on the farm. Here it is. And the straw from this crop will be bedding for the cows. And yesterday we were carting rush hay from some meadows down at Havod, which is the name of our cheese, bringing it back to the farm so we can bed the cows in winter. The whole thing's about the circular economy, about Dame Ellen MacArthur. So all that sort of thing is what we're trying to put into practice here. And there's nothing remarkable about this farm. I believe that the same principles and practices we're using here can be used by farmers throughout the world.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
What about the difference between traditional farming and rewilding? I've also chaired panels on rewilding where there's been an almost anger towards the idea, and I think in particular in Wales there was an incident where rewilding was kind of rejected en masse as a thing. But it's not that rewilding is for everywhere, is it? And it's not that full-on permaculture is for everywhere. How do you see all of those coming together, and how should farmers see all of those as opportunities?
Yeah, well, I think it's very important you say we need to reconcile this, because I know John Holden, he's actually been to this farm, and I know Charlie and Isabella.
All of these are behind behind the rewilding.
They're all passionate advocates of rewilding.
Yeah.
But actually, of course we need some rewilding, but we also need to feed the world. So for me the question is, can the biodiversity which used to coexist with farming, that's all the nature, the flowers, the insects, the birds and everything, coexist with a food production system which is productive enough to feed everyone, but at the same time doesn't suppress all the nature? And I think again the answer is yes, you can, but you need to avoid using chemical fertilisers and pesticides.
Completely.
We've never used any here.
Yep.
So we're 48 years in and we've never used any. So the system works.
Excellent. And so where do you think rewilding fits? And
Oh yeah, sorry, I should have
in
said,
terms of
yeah.
farming, who
So-
should see rewilding as their opportunity?
I think on every farm you need a bit of wild.
Yeah.
So we could walk to the pond, which we've made, which is its own self-sufficient ecosystem, where there are lots of dragonflies and newts and toads and frogs, and that's a part of our farm which we, as it were, allowed to just be what it is.
Yeah.
And every hedge is the same in a way. You know, we've got lots of little wild places on this farm. We don't want to rewild the whole thing because we want to produce food, and I think that most farmers feel that way. They want to farm in harmony with nature. They just need to make it pay. And at the moment it's very hard to do this. I mean, I've got a day job, so I've been able to kind of not indulge but experiment with this, and I've found it's worked, but now we need to take it to scale.
Great. And does the pond benefit the farm as well, or you're doing that to do good?
I think it does. I think that all these, you know, there's a terrible jargon word for this, ecosystem services.
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of about like pollinating insects,
Yeah.
which have a function in nature. Look at these beautiful oxeye daisies, aren't they lovely?
Yep.
Actually, they're not oxeye daisies. They're a
They're
daisy
daisy.
family. So oxeye daisies come earlier than this. But they have, that's interesting, isn't it? So this is a crop of oats,
Yeah.
but in the corner is a lot of wildflowers. We've not used any herbicides, any pesticides. So in the bottom of this crop is a lot of unsown stuff, which insects love. So the bottom of the food chain coexists with the food crop that we're growing. And I think that's my answer to rewilding. Not everyone is going to do it the same way. Maybe some people can rewild their whole place, but that's not going to feed whatever it is, 9 billion people.
Do you see there is a place though for the big tracts of rewilding? So for example, that's the idea of creating bigger, better, more joined up
Probably, but not too
wild
much.
spaces.
I think probably. I mean, we want to save the remaining rainforests. I go to Transylvania, where there's incredible wilderness areas where but even there people are farming in harmony with nature. So I think if we're lucky enough some farmers are lucky enough to literally be able to rewild, fair enough for them. But for those of us who are wanting to produce food, sorry about this, in a way which is more nature friendly,
Yep.
then I think the good news is that, look, here is a corner of a field which is just rewilding.
Yeah.
I didn't do it, it just
did itself.
happened. So I think coexistence is really interesting. And I think every day when we look around the farm, we need to realise that we are not separate from nature. We are part of nature. We actually are nature. So our relationship with every single aspect of the farm,
Yep.
whether it's the hedge here, or whether it's the field margin, or whether it's the cows themselves, this is an ecosystem in its own right. It's a managed ecosystem. The planet is now a managed ecosystem. Did you read that book, The End of Nature, written by Bill McKibben, published in 1990, where he said, you know, the Anthropocene, we've intervened so much now with the natural ecosystems, you can't talk about nature anymore. And actually you can, because we're part of nature, and we need to think of ourselves as being managing an ecosystem which is in trouble. Look at these swallows. Can you see them? They are here because the cows are here. So there are insects associated with the cows, the flies and the dung, and the swallows will be healthier because there are lots of livestock on this farm.
So as we walk back to the farm, can we touch on, or ordinary people trying to figure out what they can do in terms of what they eat, what they buy, their consumer habits. How can they help support the idea of moving agriculture towards regenerative methods?
Well,
should we all be eating just plants?
There's a massive debate about going on at the moment. Everybody's got a view, and I think that the predominant view amongst particularly young people is we need to go plant-based, livestock are part of the problem, and we need to massively reduce our meat and livestock product consumption. But in fact, I think the answer is more interesting than that. I think what we need to eat, all of us, should be related to the food which farmers can produce if they farm in a regenerative way. And so what we are doing in my organisation, the Sustainable Food Trust at the moment, is we're doing a study where we're imagining the whole of the United Kingdom converted to regenerative and sustainable farming, and we're calculating how much food will be produced and which types. And then we're dividing that by the number of people in the country, and then that would represent your diet. So let's say you're asking the question, you're not a vegetarian, and you just want to know, well, if I was to eat that way, what would I have available? Well, there might be some surprising answers. You wouldn't be able to eat any intensely produced pork or chickens because there won't be enough grain to feed them. Because if the whole of the UK went regenerative, grain production would halve. But you would be able to eat cheese from our farm or somewhere, and red meat like lamb and beef. And a lot of people would say, well, you can't eat that because those animals emit methane, which is causing climate change. But if you farm in a rotational carbon building way, as we are, the carbon gain of the soil will offset the methane gases from the ruminants. So, from the cattle and the sheep. So there's a much more. So I think all these complicated questions need to be made simple and then translated into a diet that people can actually eat. Of course we should eat more vegetables, that's obvious. And we used to grow a lot of vegetables here, but because the supermarkets took all their packing stations to the eastern counties, we couldn't supply them, so we had to give up. We supplied carrots to all the supermarkets back in the 80s and 90s.
Okay, so yes to eating more plants.
Yes, more vegetables, but
what about
the livestock products that we do eat need to be compatible with the regenerative farming systems we need. And contrary to popular opinion, that actually is more, or at least as much, livestock products from cattle and sheep, not a lot less.
Just to clarify for anybody who's just joined us, we are talking to Patrick of the Sustainable Food Trust about all things farming and the future of farming. If you want to go past.
Just go down to the farm.
Okay, lovely.
This way.
Yes. What did we get to? I was going to ask you about waste actually. So you mentioned
waste,
before
yes.
food waste for people at home looking at their own eating habits.
Well, at the moment, the story is that 50% of what... This is related to waste. 50% of all the food that's produced at the moment is wasted, split about 50-50 before and after the farm gate. So obviously...
And what does waste mean when those figures are thrown around? Does that mean...
It might mean that a crop isn't properly harvested, or in the case of when we were growing carrots, the supermarkets had very high grading standards, so that we would not send off
knobbly carrots,
bent ones, that sort of stuff. And pigs are an interesting question. So it's not that we, in a regenerative world, we wouldn't eat no pork at all, but we'd eat pigs that were fed on swill, which was banned after the BSE crisis because it was a potentially infective thing. And I think that livestock farms of the future, the pigs ought to be like this, kept outside and fed on whey or grain which isn't good enough for the cows or something like that. In other words, pigs are great waste recyclers. So I think we need to think of that in the new farm economy and not eat industrially produced pigs fed on grain.
Okay. And the other part of food waste, you said part of it was at the kind of crop stage, and then
and then we throw away food. It goes past its best by date, which is a bit of nonsense, really. A huge amount of food is wasted after it's sold and gets into fridges and just isn't eaten. So during the war, that wouldn't have happened because they valued food more. And I think what's happened in my farming lifetime is we've got to produce an enormous amount of food using a lot of chemicals and unsustainable practices, and people sense that the food isn't as nutritious as it used to be, and they're right, so they don't value it, so they throw it away. So I think we're going to have to waste a lot less. We need to redistribute the food because 50% of the population of the world are now overweight or obese, and we need to deal with that. We probably need to look after people who are lower income groups, because I think the price of food will go up under this regime.
Yep.
But we can do that, governments can do that, they can give them green food stamps or whatever it is. They need to make sure that every citizen, regardless of their income, has the right to sustainably produce food. And we can do all this and I think have a world where we restore the biodiversity, lock up the carbon back into the soil, and have a healthy population.
Okay, and you also think, so in the report that's coming out, you think that we can feed the whole of the UK from farms in the UK and at the same time be adding carbon back to the soil?
Yes, I do, and I think this needs to be taken to scale. I think we've got some barriers to overcome because the UK Climate Change Committee, as I said, don't think that way. But we're working hard by bringing people to this farm, showing them that the system can work as it is here. And actually, let's go and look at the cheese.
Okay.
Let's look at the milk and the cheese fat just to show that it's really happening here.
Yep.
And I think a lot of this is about practice, because people don't believe that we would produce enough food or the system could work, all the things we've been discussing. And I hope I've convinced you that the system does work and that we can produce a lot of food from a hill like this, which is not particularly special part of land. I mean, it's got lots of challenges.
And on the scale between whether we have to be full-on intensive to full-on permaculture, what do you think is the happy medium?
I think this is probably a happy medium. There's no one size or one system that's absolutely perfect for all farms. But I don't think what the Climate Change Committee think is that we should further intensify on the best agricultural land and then let the rest go back to nature. So I would imagine that George and probably the Climate Change Committee think this farm should be sort of semi-rewilded and we need to get rid of the animals on it. Well, I don't think that's right. Look, here's the milk. This is 4 milkings in a Dutch cheese vat, and this will be cheese by about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Isn't that nice? So, you know the principle of the circular economy, here it is. Everything stays on the farm, we're adding value to the milk, we're making a good cheese, and I think this could be taken to scale.
And can I still eat cheese? I have learnt the potential high carbon footprint from various television programs of cheese. You think it can be done without the carbon footprint?
Well, the story of cheese is take milk, fresh from the bulk tank, still warm in our case, add friendly bacteria, heat the water to warm the milk further. Well, we can do that with solar thermal and solar PV, which is on the shed. So I think the answer is regenerative and sustainable dairy farming can absolutely be part of the solution. There's a chap called Tim Mead from Yo Valley Farms who produces enormous amounts of yogurt, and he's done carbon sampling on his farm, and he reckons that if the results of his farm were replicated all over the UK, the milk from the Yo Valley farming system could be carbon negative. So once again, I'm an orthodoxy challenger. I've been an orthodoxy challenger all my life, and I think there's an awful lot of current orthodoxy about what the government and others are saying about how we need to change our farming systems, which are not plain wrong, but substantially wrong and need re-evaluation. And that's a challenging thing to say. I'm now challenging the Climate Change Committee. I mean, these guys are scientists, they've been working on this, they're advising government, and I'm saying, no, you've got it wrong in terms of what you're advocating.
And do you think you can have influence at that level? And if so, what is it that gives you influence?
That's a good question. I think...
Obviously you have got influence, otherwise I wouldn't be asking the question, because I've seen it.
I think over a farming lifetime, which is now 48 years here, I've been practicing and preaching, as it were. And I think when you are saying what you're saying from the practical experience, it has more weight. So people, I think, are listening now. I mean, the Henry Dimbleby report that's just been published.
Yep.
I know Henry Dimbleby, in fact his uncle's coming here tomorrow,
yes.
And we're going on a walk together. And I think people need to come to farms like this, because I think seeing is believing. And I think too many of the government policy advisors are not agriculturalists. They don't practice. So they're advising on a theoretical solution to feeding Britain and the world without the knowledge and practice. And I think that, so for me, my own experience of farming has been completely vital in what I say.
But it seems like they're listening. There's certainly various things in that food strategy that says they're listening to the sorts of things that you're saying. At least they are partly listening at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's true. And Michael Gove, I mean, I'm not a great fan, well, I'm a very strongly anti-Brexit and don't share all his politics, but Michael Gove, when he was in DEFRA, did a fantastic job, and then he left. And so now farmers are wondering what the hell to do, you know, the ELMS scheme, the government don't know what to do with it, and we're trying to get that right. I'm talking to Henry Dimbleby, I'm talking to Michael Gove still, even though he's not in DEFRA anymore.
But still has an interest, active interest in this.
Definitely, and I think he's one of the sentient beings in government at the moment. So hopefully his influence can help inform the agenda for the COP26.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
We need a COP26 which literally changes the world for food and farming, and we can do it.
Excellent. So you are optimistic. My last question was going to be, how optimistic are you from anyone out there who has a level of climate anxiety, or they try and not think about it because they think it's all too big to be able to fix? How optimistic are you that we can make rapid changes by 2030?
I think the honest answer is none of us know how much we can do in the very short time we've got available. But I think that at various points in human history there have been consciousness shifts, and I think one of those is going on right now, particularly amongst young people. I think young people are ahead of, you know, there's a sort of collective consciousness which is evolving rapidly, and I think what you're doing, getting ideas, new thinking across, which resonates with young people in particular, can be a force for change. And I think individual citizens thinking collectively and acting collectively is the strongest force in the world. It's much stronger than the governments. So yes, we can. I'm optimistic.
And can they rally farmers to also shift as well, as you are doing? Can farmers become as optimistic?
I think so, because if we eat the right diets, then that's going to help farmers in the marketplace. And if the Welsh government, who we are definitely talking to, come up with a regenerative farming scheme, which they're going to do, which is incredibly exciting, the first in the world, and if DEFRA copy it, which is what I hope, although they would never admit to that, I think we can do this.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That has been an absolute inspiration. If anybody does have any specific questions based on any of that conversation, are you happy to answer them if we send them to you later on?
I'm happy to personally answer them. If you follow us on Instagram, Havod Cheese, so you can come to us and we'll do it. I mean, if anybody wants to ask us anything, we're up for it, because we believe that the future of this farm ought to be to welcome people to get more involved, to understand more about these things, so that we can be a transmitter of new thinking to people who want to change their farming and their food and their diets.
And if you want to hear more stories, previous farms we visited, further farms we're going to be visiting, make sure you follow us on YouTube and look at climatechallenge.live.
And I hope you have a lovely time at St David's. It's probably Wales's holiest place.
Fantastic. Look forward to it. We did just stand in a wind tunnel for that last